We do not want to become a nation where the party in power uses multiple different legal cases at the same time, pushing untested novel legal theories to knock out its opposition in the middle of a presidential election. That is not how we do things in the United States of America. And I say this as somebody who in many national polls is now polling second. It would be easier for me if Donald Trump were eliminated from competition. That is not how I want to win. I stand on the side of principle, not politics.
There are now four different indictments.
When I say we need to unite this country.
Yeah, let me jump in. There have been four different indictments. You don't think he's committed any crimes in any of these indictments?
I don't think any of the indictments have demonstrated that he committed a crime. No. And I've written on the pages of the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere wearing a technical legal hat. And you and I can go into that detail if you're interested.
Refusing to return classified documents?
Clearly politically motivated. Well, let's just take that one as an example. That indictment made zero mention of the Presidential Records Act, the most recently passed act that relates to a president, including an outgoing president's access to documents. The fact that this is a 49-page indictment, that was silent on that fact, smacks of politicization. I also think that the fact that they use the Espionage Act, one of the most un-American acts in U.S. history, that has been used to round up anti-war activists, that was used to lock up Eugene V. Debs when he ran for president.
But do you think it's okay to have classified documents? You think it's okay for you to have classified documents laying around the Ramaswamy household?
No, it's not. But I think that there's a difference between a bad judgment and a crime. And the Presidential Records Act expressly gives the U.S. president access to those records. But they came to him and asked for the documents back, and he didn't return them. They asked for the documents back. Again, I would have made very different judgments.
Yeah.
Look, Jim, I am running in the same race that Donald Trump is. So I'm not saying that every judgment he made was the same judgment I would make. In fact, it wasn't. But that is different from charging it as a crime, which I think sets an awful precedent in our country. And if you want to get a little technical
in the federal election
Jim,
case, he lied about the election. He tried to overturn the election results. Why not call him out for that as well?
I will remind you the Supreme Court's precedent in Alvarez, a 2012 case, which held that public officials, including politicians, have a First Amendment right to lie, to tell the truth, to even make statements they didn't believe, let alone the fact that there isn't a shred of evidence to suggest that Trump didn't even believe his own claims. And so we can get into the legal technical details all we want. That's going to happen in the courtroom. But as a matter of judgment, as somebody who is running to and expects to be the next president of the United States, my top job is to reunite this country. And my way of doing that is going to be to pardon Donald Trump on day one and to pardon really anybody else who was also the victim of a politically motivated persecution through prosecution. We have to move forward as a country. And I think this sets a dangerous precedent unless we actually pardon.
But Mr. Ramaswamy, you just said you want to wait for all the details, the technical details to come out at trial, but you're declaring beforehand that you would pardon him. Why not listen for the facts to come out at trial and then make that determination?
I'm saying it based on one assumption. The assumption is that the statements in each of the indictments are the most prosecution favorable statements we're going to get. Any legal scholar would tell you that is a fair assumption. In any case, the prosecution always puts up its strongest foot in the indictment itself. We haven't even heard from the defense. So yes, if there are gaping surprises that come up, there's zero evidence to suggest that Trump was selling those secrets to foreign adversaries for private gain. But if those facts come up, of course, I would revisit my judgment. But the fact of the matter is the prosecution obviously makes the most aggressive statement of its case in the indictment. And assuming that's the case here, as it is in any other case, I will absolutely pardon Trump on day one, January 20th, 2025, when I'm in office.
Would you pardon Trump's other alleged co-conspirators in both the documents and the election cases?
It depends on how the facts match up to the law. Take about the documents case. There are special features of the law that apply to a U.S. president. Literally, the Presidential Records Act treats past U.S. presidents.
But why say you would pardon Trump on day one, but not? But why say you're going to pardon Trump on day one, but not make that kind of blanket promise to the alleged co-conspirators? Shouldn't they get that kind of same pardon offer?
I'm favorably inclined. I'm favorably inclined to do it. But right now, I'm a competitor against Donald Trump in this primary, and I want to be very clear on the side of principle. Though it's against my interest in this race, that's why I think in the interest of uniting this country, it is especially important to be clear about that fact. I expect to maybe making tens of pardons on day one. I think there are countless Americans who have been the victims of politically motivated persecutions through prosecution. Peaceful protesters on January 6th, January 6th defendants who actually have had constitutional due process violations. Julian Assange is someone I've specifically identified as somebody I would absolutely pardon. Ross Ulbricht, Douglas Mackey, others. But I think that the only way we're going to move forward as a country, there can be no reconciliation without truth. We have to put that past behind us. And my top job is going to be to heal the wounds of this nation to lead us forward. Because even look at the conversations we're having
Trump
on a
is going to
given day
heal
on
the
news.
wounds. Pardoning Trump is going to heal the wounds of the nation.
I do. I do think it will be a step towards healing the wounds of the nation. I think there are deep wounds in this country that are the consequence of systematic censorship, the weaponization of police force to accomplish political goals through the justice system. That is wrong. This is not an easy project ahead for the next president. I am in this race because I do see a lot of candidates on both sides motivated by vengeance and grievance. I am motivated by leading this nation forward. And the way we're going to do it is by restoring one standard of the rule of law for all Americans, restore the integrity of the justice system, and leave politics to politics. The people of this country should decide who the next president is. They're free to take into account all of the information that has been laid out by left-wing media, right-wing media, et cetera, to make their decisions. If they didn't think Donald Trump made good decisions, then they should take that into account when voting him out. But that is not the basis for a prosecution.
What about Trump making these threats and making these kinds of inflammatory comments about the judge, about the special counsel, and so on in some of these cases? Do you defend that? Should he knock that off?
So I'm not familiar with the specific nature of which inflammatory comment you're referring to or not. He's clearly deeply aggrieved by the fact that he's being prosecuted through 4 separate cases that have arisen at the same time in the middle of an election. Again, from my vantage point, I would make very different judgments and would have made very different judgments than Donald Trump. But that is a different point than saying this should be criminalized. That's where I'm at. So I'm not in this to defend
he says, I'm coming
Trump
after
or anybody
you if you're
else.
coming
I'm in this
after
to
me.
defend the nation.
But you've heard him say, you've heard how he said, I'm coming after you if you come after me. I mean, you've heard that, correct? Is that appropriate?
I mean, if he means that he's going to file a motion, if he means he's going to file a motion to dismiss, then he should absolutely file a motion to dismiss, which I think will be very embarrassing for the prosecutor and, frankly, very embarrassing for the entire
you don't think that's
law
what he means
enforcement
when he
apparatus,
says that?
if that's indeed granted.
But you don't think that's what he means when he says that?
I'm going to be very honest with you. I have not.
Isn't there a threatening undertone there?
You've clearly studied every word. Look, I'm going to be very honest with you, Jim. I have not read the specific tweet or social media post that you're referring to. I'm running for president. I'm looking at reviving our economy and declaring independence from China. I'm not parsing every social media post from every one of my other candidates. But broadly speaking, my whole point is there's a difference between a bad judgment and a crime. And the moment that we conflate
a lot of crimes start
two,
with bad judgments,
that
don't
is
they?
the moment that we have a threat to liberty.
Yeah.
Well, that's okay, but you actually have to have committed a crime to be prosecuted for one. So making a very bad judgment as a politician, that's a basis for a voter to make a decision. But that's how we've got to do things in the United States of America. We have to let the people of this country decide who actually runs the country, not a federal administrative police state. And I just think that sets a dangerous and deeply problematic precedent in this country. And that is why I've been so vocal against it. That is why I'm clearly committed to pardoning Donald Trump if he is convicted.
But you said earlier you would wait for the facts to come out. If there are some big surprises, you may reconsider that.
My assumption is that the worst statement of the facts, the most favorable version of the facts, is in the indictment. In 99.9% of legal cases, that's exactly how it works in the United States. And I said that on day one when I made my commitment that was my assumption.
Let's talk about China. You talked about China. You proposed to radio host Hugh Hewitt this week that the U.S. should help Taiwan deter a Chinese invasion until the U.S. has achieved, quote, semiconductor independence. Does it really serve our long-term interests to say we support territorial integrity until a country is no longer useful to us?
I think that moving from strategic ambiguity to strategic clarity is actually a good thing for the United States to both advance our interests and to avoid war, as well as to be a more trusted partner I don't think it's credible when we make hollow proclamations to defend democracy or to defend territorial sovereignty as a principle when, in fact, we choose that principle selectively anyway. I think it's far more credible for us to be honest, to say that I will, as the next U.S. president, I stand for advancing American interests, period. That allows other nations to actually trust us. Just as we can trust them to follow their self-interest, they can trust us to follow ours.
But are you sending a signal that an allied
neoconservatism or liberal hegemony?
But are you sending a signal that an allied democracy could be taken over by another power just because they're no longer making something that we need?
Well, let's get real, Jim. I mean, the fact of the matter is our current posture towards Taiwan is that the U.S. embraces the one China policy in the status quo. The standard protocol is a U.S. president isn't even supposed to pick up a phone call from the leader of Taiwan. In fact, when Trump did it, they laughed at him as though he was an outsider rube. And so the reality is that line of reasoning that somehow you're now going to call them an allied nation selectively to push back on my vision of strategic clarity is just a farce and betrays exactly what our current posture is in the first place. What I'm bringing to our foreign policy is honesty that will advance our interests. I'm moving from strategic ambiguity to be strategically very clear that we will defend Taiwan until we achieve semiconductor independence. I expect that to happen by the end of my first term, by 2028.
But then China can have Taiwan?
Our commitments necessarily will change.
But then China can have Taiwan?
To be clear, after that, by being clear, not necessarily. What that really means is Taiwan, between now and then, can actually spend what it should be spending on national defense. Taiwan spends less than 2% of GDP on its military. That is shameful. Taiwan needs to be spending over 4% of its own GDP. But by being strategically clear, we give Taiwan a chance to build up its own defense capabilities. And China will also know that it is absolutely not in China's interest, not any rational actor in China would want to make that move before 2028. In the meantime, what am I going to do? Achieve semiconductor independence for our nation and also build up our own homeland defense capabilities. That's something that's badly lacking. Super EMP defenses, cyber defenses, nuclear missile defenses. But if we're at that point by 2028, along with semiconductor independent, then no, I don't expect to want to send our sons and daughters in this country to die to fight over somebody else's territorial dispute. And I think that that's exactly what this Chinese Civil War dating back to 1949 was all about. There are two reasons why China might go after Taiwan. One is to lord over an economic gun over the United States. I refuse to let that happen. But a second is sorting out business dating back to 1949 between Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong. That's not something that I'm going to send our sons and daughters to settle.
And you've also suggested that Vladimir Putin be allowed to keep parts of Ukraine as part of a way to solve that conflict. What if he wants parts of Poland?
You leave out the most important part of that deal.
More of Ukraine next. Aren't you letting some of these authoritarian leaders off the hook?
What actually advances? Far from it. I think that the Biden administration is so stubbornly attached to the idea of getting Xi Jinping to drop Vladimir Putin. What I think we need to be doing is get Vladimir Putin to drop Xi Jinping. Just like Nixon went to China in 1972, I think Putin is like the new Mao. I will visit Moscow and I will pull Russia out of its military alliance with China. The Russia-China military alliance is the single greatest military threat that we face today. Hypersonic missile capabilities, nuclear capabilities in Russia, far ahead of us or China. A naval capacity in China ahead of ours, combined with an economy that we depend on for our modern way of life. Those two nations are in a military alliance with one another, and nobody in either political party is talking about it. Worst of all, our engagement in Ukraine is further driving Russia into China's arms. So my foreign policy centers on weakening that alliance. That advances American interests.
But you would let Putin have parts of Ukraine.
That is how we actually secure peace.
But you would let Putin have parts of Ukraine.
Freeze the current lines. I would freeze the current lines of control, and that would leave parts of the Donbas region with Russia. I would also further make a commitment that NATO will not admit Ukraine to NATO. But there are even greater wins that I will get for the United States in return. The top of the list. No, our goal should not be for Putin to lose. Our goal should be for America to win. That's what we have forgotten in this country, is that Driving Russia into the ground is not a U.S. strategic goal. A U.S. strategic goal is to secure peace and prosperity for Americans. And so, you know what? I do think many of those military resources being used to protect against an invasion across somebody else's border halfway around the world should be used to protect against the invasion across our own southern border right here at home. And in the meantime, yes, we need to pull Russia apart from China instead of driving Russia further into China's hands. And I think we have a foreign policy establishment in both parties, frankly, Republican Party and Democratic Party alike, that behaves as though we're still in the Cold War of the last century, forgetting that the USSR does not exist anymore and that the real threat we face today is communist China, which is that much stronger when Vladimir Putin is in Xi Jinping's camp.
All right, Vivek Ramaswamy, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.